Hello, everybody. It is good to see you all again.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. We go away for a few weeks and everything happens.
A lot of things happened, especially in your life, John. I had a wonderful time. John's life.
It's been hard. This is the last podcast we're going to do in this house, without tanks rolling past in the background. So it's house moving for me, as long as the cat died and we got COVID. And Anyway, that doesn't matter. This is Totally Tanked, the podcast.
We are Totally Tanked, and this is the tankiest podcast in Tankville.
Mm-hmm. My name's John. This is Rob.
Hello.
And what are we talking about this week, Rob?
The Type 10. Also known as the TK-X or the MBT-X or the Hitomaru Shiki Sencha. If you can't guess, it's they're bad pronunciations. It's a Japanese tank.
Yep, and it is episode 42, and it is the 21st of January 2023, which is very important when we get talking about current events in the second half of the show.
Yes.
So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about the Japanese Type 10, which is a very interesting tank. Obviously, or we wouldn't be doing this. And then we are going to play you an interview we did with my brother who lives in Japan. So some interesting material about what Japan's thinking about defence issues.
What's happening over there right at this moment as we speak.
Yep,
and the changes they're making. In
the second half of the show, we will get to the Puma debacle and Ukraine stuff and Elon Musk and other things. Quickly before we do, though, very important, we just want to dedicate this show to friend of the show, Lejla Nikolas, who tragically passed away a couple of weeks ago. Very young, very fit. She's mad keen on tanks.
The Macabre episode was her choice. That was that's why we did it for that episode was for her. And yes, it's very sad that her tragic passing.
So we're dedicating this episode to her and Cornelius, her partner, who I'm sure will be watching or listening at some point. Hang in there, buddy. Everything's gonna work out one way or another. So thank you. Moving on to
the Type 10.
Type 10.
All right, some stats.
Hang on quickly before we do that. We've got to thank the patrons, Rob.
Oh, please do.
Yes, so patreon.com/totallytanked. There go their names behind us. And we really do appreciate their small monthly financial contribution, which does enormously help us pay the bills.
Yeah, no, we appreciate your efforts and what you provide for us and ensuring that John can keep doing all the technical work that he does and paying for all the bits and pieces while I can just come along and drink beer and talk to you about tanks. And the tanks we're talking about today is the Type 10. So it's a 4th generation tank. 3-person crew, starts out at 40 tonnes and has armour packages getting up to 48.
Which we're going to talk about. Cause
this is a very important part of this tank.
Saying we've got a lightweight tank, but by the time we protect it properly, it's not lightweight. It's still 40. I mean, it's 30 tonnes lighter than Leopards and Challengers and Abrams. Yeah, the is it an MBT? Is it a light tank? Is an eternal question in this weight space.
The real question was whether or not it can turn into a Gundam and fly away. Is the real question with their nanocrystalline steel armour. Not yet, but we don't know. We don't know. There's not
anyone who knows isn't telling.
That's right. So it does have. It's armed with a 120mm L44 smoothbore gun, Japanese made. It's strangely enough, their barrel is called a Type 10 as well. The gun is called a Type 10. Made from specialised steel that weighs 13% lighter than the normal L44 Rheinmetall 120mm smoothbore. So, again, it's all about saving on weight.
Now, Rheinmetall know a bit about steel, but Japan Steel also know a lot about steel. So it's frankly, every generation of Western tanks, there's a gun that becomes dominant because it's so much better than everything else. And, the Royal Ordnance 105 was the previous example of that. And now it's the Rheinmetall 120. So it is still good to see competition in this space. And there is a whole new special armor-piercing, fin-stabilised discarding Sabo round that they built for it that won't work on anyone else's gun.
It's also called the Type 10.
It's also called the Type 10. At least it's used in the Type 10.
Can only be used in the Type 10. In fact, yes. Is not compatible with other other standard NATO 120mm guns.
Now, we've had a few comments. Let's address those. Antonio says hello from Ottawa, Canada.
Hey, buddy. How you doing?
Hello, Antonio. I Like Tanks says good morning. And our old mate Alan Desmond is back. Good to see you again, Alan. Giving us the old joke about political science. Brazil is the nation of the future and always will be. And the whole tanks are obsolete and always will be. Yeah. Since the first chariot encountered an archer, we've been essentially saying tanks are obsolete, and yet it's the only thing we care about. When I say we, I'm big we. Yeah.
So it's got the L44 gun. It's also got a 50 cal on the roof, which can be crew operated and or remote operated by the commander. 7.62 in coax in the turret.
Bit disappointed to see a 50 cal flex mount in this day and age on the roof of a
tank. But no, it can be remote operated. Yeah, so you have both choices.
It's not a full Crow system though.
No, it's not the full Crow system, but it can be remote operated. 106 built. So
barely counts as a production tank.
Yeah, but they are still in production. So more will be coming. The question is how many and how soon. That will be something we'll discuss. It's been in service since 2010 till present day. The first
very long development period though.
Yeah, well...
About 20 years in...
they started thinking about it straight after they brought in the Type 90, which is its predecessor, in 1990. So they started saying, okay, we need a new tank after we've got this one. Now what's going to be the next one? They didn't actually put real pen to paper until 2002, and by 2008 they had 2006 they had the first prototype, but actually rolled the first prototype out in 2008 and started and put in the order for the first 13 tanks was put out then, and that's when they came into service in 2010. It's 9.4 metres long, 2.3 metres high, and 3.2 metres wide. So comparable to most Western tanks, but not...
It's a little shorter.
Yeah.
Which is
not
good.
Much.
Short is good in tanks. The lower you can get them, the better.
22 rounds of the 120mm ammo in the tank. Another 14 in the autoloader. So only 36 rounds all up.
I mean, modern tank design is really moving away from having lots of rounds in the tank just because it's the single most likely cause of catastrophic failure.
I think they're just going for weight reduction. So they're saying, right, what is the minimum number of rounds we can have in the tank and still keep the weight down? Because, let's face it, each round is 25 kilos. So there's four rounds is 100 kilos that you're adding into your tank or something along those lines. I don't know the precise numbers.
Yeah, so 40 rounds is a whole ton. But there is... If I was king of the world, I wouldn't have rounds in my tank that weren't in the autoloader. I'd be having someone else in a different sort of vehicle coming along to give me some more when I needed that. But, breaking contact is a problem. I don't doubt.
Personally, I see it as a weight reduction activity and saying, well, that's not a whole lot of rounds. I do wonder, and I'll discuss it later, about how they reload them. Is there a quick way of doing it? But who knows?
I would also say one of the things that's coming out of the Ukraine war is the next generation of tanks, the one that has only just started being designed, is not going to have any ammunition that isn't blast panelled.
No.
The idea of having explosives in the crew compartment of the tank is just not going to continue.
No, I mean these ones are all in the bustle and the autoloader and so forth.
But I don't think they're fully blast stored. I think at the moment the Abrams is the only tank in the world that's properly contained.
This is how little we know about this tank because they don't show us a lot of stuff inside. All I read is I first thought it only had 22 rounds, and I only found out later that yes, there are another 14 rounds in the autoloader, which is in the bustle. So where the other 22 rounds are held. It's got a V8 120 horsepower, 1200 horsepower engine, water cooled, diesel, 4-stroke somehow. Yep,
a 4-stroke diesel. Great, good on them. Continuous variable transmission, which...
now, this is the important part.
My new car has a continuous variable transmission as well.
Where does your car come from, John?
It comes from Japan.
There you go.
Yeah, and one of the things that this gives, at least in tanks... Look, I've never...
There's a spider crawling on your microphone.
I've never tried to drive fast in reverse in my car for strange and obvious reasons. But apparently it will drive exactly as fast in reverse as it will forward, thanks to the miracle of continuous variable transmission.
Which this tank also has, which allows it to go 70 k's forward and 70 k's in reverse. Now, the question I had as soon as I heard that was saying, the driver's got to have a really good reversing camera to be able to go that fast. And all the videos I've seen, the commander has got his head sticking out, watching backwards, as well as they're screaming across some sort of parade ground or tank showing area at 70 k's an hour.
Yeah, look, I think this is a parade ground capability more than a real world one. But being able to haul ass out of a firing position is super important. And having the same gearing to go backwards as forwards is not to be discounted, as we've seen in some of the tank-on-tank combat in Ukraine.
Yep. Your ability to redeploy very quickly in the reverse is very important. And keeping your front towards enemy. The hydropneumatic suspension, so it can sit, stand, kneel, lean, and do all those fun things that the K2 Panther was doing, which means it can peep over the top of hills, it can hide in ditches, it can lean around the side of mountains so it doesn't slip down the side and keep a level. And
one of the cool things as well is because, and we'll get to this more, it has a completely automated fire control system, which is in complete control of the tank. And it means it does all sorts of what looks to the human eye weird stuff, like leaning the tank at a forward angle and then turning the turret to complete the firing solution with the gun elevation of the turret turn. We're seeing this a lot where artificial intelligence is controlling weapon systems. It's going with angles that humans wouldn't have tried or thought of, and they're just like, this machine's got it within spec, boom. So, and there are pictures in our slideshow of this tank at all sorts of weird angles, which is the computer finding the easiest for it fire control solution.
Cost of $15 million for each tank in 2021 dollars is what we found.
That is an expensive tank.
That is an expensive tank, but I got to say the K2 Panther and Leclerc.
K2's only about $8 million, I thought.
No, that was in 2009 dollars. That was I couldn't find the equivalent years and dollars.
There's no real equivalent
all together. So basically, they're all very expensive. Is what you're looking at. I'm assuming I don't know. So because of that, I don't know if it is more expensive than the Panther and Leclerc. But just because you think those tanks being much bigger and heavier, they would be more expensive. But the weight savings that the Japanese have brought about is by throwing a lot of money at the situation and saying, okay, how do we make something just as survivable from the frontal attack as the Leclerc and the K2 Black Panther while weighing 30 tons less. So
Leclerc, Rob.
Leclerc, sorry.
I did want to say, I Like Tanks in the comments has noted that front-facing the Type 10 looks a lot like Leopard 2s. I would also say it looks a lot like Leclerc. And I think in particular as quite rare in the modern era, a steel-hulled modern tank. It's got basically a lot of the chieftain to it. But obviously with a much better engine because the Japanese built it.
Yes. So this isn't the beer review, but we are going to drink another beer now.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So this is a Japanese beer. This was brought along because,
it's brewed in Bankstown in Australia.
But it is a Japanese.
Kirin does own one of the major Australian breweries, and they're quite keen to get their own beer out here, even if they brew it locally. So yes, Kirin Ichiban, which stands for first press, and they bang on about, it's first press beer, like it's olive oil. And it's technically
100% malt.
It's theoretically possible to get some extracted sugars out of a second pressing of beer, but no one, except a real desperado of a brewer, would do it. So it's not quite the big innovation they'd have us believe.
But I'll keep you on tenterhooks as to what beer we will be doing for the beer review. Ahoy!
But I would say I like Kirin's beer in general. It has that whole thing of Japanese beers and that you can drink a lot of them without getting a headache.
Very good. I do enjoy Japanese beer.
Cool.
It's one of my preferences.
Okay, what else do we want to talk about with the Type 10, right?
Don't worry, it does appear in Girls and Panzer.
Does it?
Yes, of course it does. It's a Japanese anime, buddy. It gets thrown out of the back of I'm assuming some sort of C2 plane that and then screams across the car park, smashing a few cars as the driver pops her head out of the tank and says "Konnichiwa." So yes, the Gozen Panzer as that represents. It's built by Mitsubishi Heavy Industries.
Yep.
Because why not? Because something bits and pieces of fun. So that's basically most of our stats about it. And now we get into the meat of the discussion.
Now, why did the Japanese immediately after debuting the Type 90 suddenly say, we're going to need another tank?
We do need another tank because it came in at 52 to 55 tons. And guess what? Has anybody been to Japan? It is it has a lot of islands. It has a lot of mountains. And they have a lot of
bridges.
It has a lot of rivers and a lot of gorges and a lot of bridges. And a lot of those bridges were built centuries ago and aren't going to hold up a 50-ton tank. So they decided, look, of the 17,600 bridges in Japan on the 7,000 islands that make up the nation, we need a tank that can go across more than not. And that was found to be, the weight limit was about 50 tons. So that's why they came up with a tank that had to be under that 50-ton weight limit to get across 84% of the bridges, whereas the Type 90 at 55 tons could only cross about 64%. So it got relegated. That spider is making some moves. I don't know who he's linked up to.
He seems to be levitating.
He is levitating. He came out in front of the camera and then...
All right.
Anyway, the Type 90 can only go...
Cool.
Go across about 64% of the bridges in Japan. So it was relegated to the northern island of Hokkaido in order to stop any T-72s coming across from the Kuril Islands to the north, which as we discussed with Bo later on...
I think the threat of Russian invasion is low, but apparently you never
know.
know.
They're right there. They are right there. It's not like it's not a big gap of water. There's Russian islands within sight of Japan. So...
Yeah, I still find it weird that Hokkaido is so much the focus with that. Although, if you're going to invade Manchuria, Hokkaido is kind of the climate you want to train for. But let's hope it doesn't come to that.
Yeah.
Cool.
And for those, and I think I mentioned in the Hargo episode, for those Australians skiing in Niseko, the reason why you're not allowed to use your mobile phones or certain devices around the top of the mountain is because that little space up the top is a military base monitoring the Russians. So yes, that's why. Yeah, it's the walkie-talkies. Australian walkie-talkies aren't allowed to be used in Niseko.
Matching, stuffing up the frequencies.
Yep. And you will get arrested and bad things will happen. Yeah, not just your pass taken away.
I'm going to tell this story because it's funny and it's related. I was once in a what's called a budget lockup where when I was working as a journalist, and the Treasury had special sensors to tell if anyone had a mobile phone because you weren't allowed to call anyone in case you had market sensitive information. And they kept pestering me saying, our sensor, they had a sensor, a mobile phone, says, our sensor says there's a phone around here. I'm like, I don't have a phone. I handed it in. There's no phone. And they're like, what about all these computers you've got? What's that do? And finally, luckily, the phone rang, and it was the Treasurer's press secretary standing there, and he just pulls his phone out and starts saying, oh, yeah, and everyone who's been involved in this pull, I was like, you. Yes. Anyway, that was very annoying.
I've worked in many buildings where, yes, there are people coming around saying, who's got a mobile phone? Anyway, other things happening. So because of Japan's positioning, the island nature, mountainous nature, small, narrow roads, heavily populated, heavily urbanized cities and everything else, they needed a tank that could... the other thing about the Type 90 is that it couldn't go on a lot of Japanese roads. It would just wreck the roads, and people didn't like having them driving down the roads.
Let's be fair. Most major tanks in the world are not legal to drive on anyone's roads. Obviously, if there's a war going, you just run them down the road. But the rest of the time, the local authorities will...
You ripped up all my cat's eyes. Who's going to pay for those?
Yeah, and also just that they don't share the road with cars very well. So that creates problems with other traffic on a public road. But the Type 10 is actually Japanese road legal.
Now that's a big effort to make a tank that you can drive down the streets of Tokyo and somewhere else in a non-combative way and say, yep, I'm road legal. Yes.
For moving around to where you need to be, it's extremely helpful.
They can put it on any sort of low loader that to transport. They don't need special permissions for that. It fits on all their trains. It's more easily transportable by sea to get to any of the islands they need to get to. It can even fit in some of their transport aircraft.
And to that end, it has skirts. Flappy skirts.
Yes. It is. When I first saw the rubber skirts on the prototype, I said to myself, those are just stone catchers. Now, I did read on further and find out that the rubber skirts on the side of the covering the tracks are there to reduce the thermal signature, to reduce the noise of the tank. But to my mind, the first thing I thought it was just to stop stones being flung up by the tank as it's driving down the streets of Japan and flinging stones into your windscreen, and you complaining to the military about, your tank broke my car, I want lots of money. And so it looks like a stone catcher, and that's basically what it looks like it's going to do. And it's also reducing dust if you're moving around in the bush or any sort of non-urbanised environment for kicking up how much dust you produce.
Dust reduction is one of those underrated parts of military vehicle design, because if there's a column of vehicles on the move, particularly on unsealed roads, you can see them 20, 30 kilometres away. If you're just on a high place, you can say, someone, and it's not us, is moving down that road. And that is powerful information. And anything you can do that reduces that means you've got to be closer and closer and closer to pick it up, is not to be underestimated either.
No.
Because if a Mark 1 eyeball on a hilltop with a radio can be monitoring the vehicle movement.
The Australian coast watchers up in the islands to the north during the war.
Didn't we do a good job by them? Anyway, sorry, moving on.
All right. Some people have pointed out that in various comments on the interwebs is that there are some other tanks around the world, John, that are under 50 tonnes as well and can utilise those Japanese bridges. And where do you think they come from?
China
and Russia. Yes, they have a lot of tanks that are under those 50 tonnes. However, what do they not have? What do those tanks not have?
C4I.
Gun depression. They can't go to the top of a hill and peep over the top and lower.
ZT-15 can.
It's only got a 105, and
I
don't think it doesn't have hydrogen.
No. Anyway, being able to kneel is, and we've discussed at length ad nauseum, but let's do it again. Gun elevation and depression, which Russian tanks are terrible at. That's how they get so much armour and so much gun into such a small tank, is by having no capacity to move the breech, very limited capacity to move the breech inside the tank.
Since for the last 50 years.
Yeah. Whereas, particularly you go back to the Yom Kippur War, cranky old Centurions, which were built to be able to move the breech a significant distance inside of the tank, were able to shoot the T-55s that were on the top of mountains that couldn't shoot back because they couldn't get their guns down. It's along with dust and gun elevation, pretty important stuff.
Now, one of the other things is, however, that's fine in mountainous terrain. What else does Japan have? Lots of cities. So in cities, it really becomes a question of who's got the better infantry support, because if your 45-ton T-72 is running around versus a 48-ton Type 10 within a Japanese city, you're not having to deal with mountainous terrain. You're not having to deal with manoeuvrability. You're just having to deal with a urban environment, which is bad. The other thing with the Type 10 that gives it the advantage in this situation is the shorter barrel. Now, they have made their L44 barrel 44 rather than 52 as the normal 120. So it can manoeuvre more easily within an urban environment. So it can turn corners without getting its barrel stuck on telephone poles, bridges, buildings, trees, walls, or anything else.
Which comes back to having this extremely specialised, highly secretive, lightweight steel that can take higher pressures with less gun. That's a neat trick if you can pull it off.
Yeah, they've got some special...
But I would say history is full of lightweight guns that turned out to fail really quickly. So for a tank that hasn't actually seen combat, it looks good on paper, but they're going to have to do some real-world testing on that.
The other thing about the L44 being short does mean that when it is going up and down hills, if it runs into any sort of ditches or anything else, it doesn't necessarily, you don't necessarily stab the barrel into the ground as you're coming down a hill and trying to level out again.
Which does cause trouble for your registration. And the other one that I only heard about recently was that they have actually had troubles. I think it was which we were talking about the pattern, that it's not just with the
Pershing.
Sorry, yes. It's not just with the gun facing forward that you can have a problem with getting stuck in ditches. You can actually have the gun reversed and coming out of the ditches.
Yeah, as per last episode, the Super Pershing gun was so long that even when it was in reverse, facing back along the body of the tank, it could still get stuck in the ground because it was so long.
But with this tank, which has basically got a very clever computer doing most of the work, I'm willing to bet it will tell the driver if it's about to enter a situation that it can't extract the turret from.
Now, that's a good question. I mean, do they take the AI for the targeting computer and actually provide that as something useful for the driver, providing useful information for the driver? So the targeting, the C4I, it has the fire control picture. This is the only MBT built with this system.
Which is basically straight out of Terminator. They literally watched the Terminator movies and they said, okay, it's going to give you a list of all the things you should shoot at.
And here's the list.
Threat, and harmless.
And which one is the priority threat? So it'll, as it goes into any sort of combat situation, if it comes across a threat area, it'll go in there. This fire control picture will look at the environment and say, okay, that is an MBT, that is an IFV, that is dismounted infantry, that is dismounted infantry with a anti-tank guided missile, that is in, and so forth, and say, this is your priority threats. This all goes through back to their joint headquarters and shared within the platoon of the tanks.
And other nearby Japanese assets that also have the C4I system, assuming any of this works. Big assumption, unproven.
And not publicised either, so there's nothing you can find out about this. This is all conjecture about it.
But this is what they're aiming for.
This is what they've stated it's going to do. So
I would say, Chieftain had problems that it was trying, and certainly Challenger had enormous problems in that they had the concepts of this sort of stuff that we're talking about, and the computers of the 1980s were nowhere near delivering it, and you could argue that the computers of today probably can deliver this stuff, but you've still got to actually get it right. You've still got to deconflict it. We talked about that with the K2. The deconfliction of these systems is going to be an enormous job, and we literally don't know how far along the road they are with it.
But as I was saying, so you've come into this threat environment. The fire control picture has taken an inventory of what's out there and said, okay, this is your number one priority. This is your number two. This is your number three. It then lays the gun on for you, and then
it not just does that. It picks out the weak points. And
so if you see
the gun at that.
So if you see your T72 across the street and says, okay, I know what this is. This is a T72 BM. Therefore, I'm going to aim the gun here for you. You just have to pull the trigger. And once the round hits, it'll then tell you, okay, that was a kill shot, aim at something else. Or that was not a kill shot, you've missed somehow, you moved, whatever else. You need to fire again and make sure you kill it this time. So the fire control picture will tell you if you need to fire again or if you move on to the next threat in your list of threat environment.
And it's a 4-second reload time with the autoloader as well. So
yes. It's not slow. There's no people involved in that. It's a case of bang, 4 seconds, bang, 4 seconds, bang, and there's some great videos. And you think, oh, how long is this lead? Oh, wow, that's how quick the reload is going.
Now, I'm willing to bet, just as in the Aegis system at sea, there is a kill everything button.
Where between your 4 tanks in your platoon, you just hit that, and the platoon commander says, "All right, kill everything in this." And
the tanks will just start going bang, 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 bang.
Yeah. We don't know.
I do not know this.
No.
I'm very sure it exists, simply because I do know that it does exist in naval warfare.
Right, there you go. The land ships, yes.
Yeah.
All right. So I think we've. Yeah, no, I think we've talked about the C4, and it was one of the priorities so along with the weight reduction and the mobility, and survivability, or we'll get onto the survivability.
C4I, by the way, stands for Command, Communications, Control. There's
Intelligence.
There's another C in there, and then intelligence. Intelligence. That's what that stands for.
Sorry, yep. Yeah. No, sorry, I'm too long on the environment. That's just no. So it was one of the most important parts of design for this tank in the 2000s when they came up with it. Say, right, this is what we're going to need to do. So we want one, it needs to be light, so it can get around Japan and not just be stuck to the open plains of Hokkaido. And two, it needs to have the latest and greatest command and control and communications and intelligence packages available, which is what has led to this fire control picture capabilities.
Let's talk again about my favourite subject with future tanks, electronic warfare.
I still question whether or not it has a tank phone. So the infantry, who are also on this system...
Well, they don't need a tank phone because they're just already in the network.
I know, but you think, I still say just the ability to... they should be in the system. They actually they're actually integrated within this. They have their own regimental electronic communication system that links in with the tank system. So any infantry you've got around you should be all available for it. But... I don't know, because it's all very secret.
Yeah. Now, in air warfare, 1973, the Yom Kippur War is considered to be the year that thereafter electronic warfare was the sole determinant of success in air warfare. And I believe that this is going to come to ground warfare much sooner than later. And this is why, and I've had arguments with the chieftain who dismisses me as an idiot, and he can do that. But I actually...
He did it very nicely, though.
Yeah, well, there was a moment we were getting heated with each other, and then we backed off.
He's a lovely guy.
Yeah, no, he is a lovely guy, and he's very knowledgeable. I just think he's a little too close to the woods for the trees on this issue. Given that in planes, radio intercept officers have been taking up a back seat in a place where real estate's even tighter than in tanks.
I finally got around to watching Maverick and saw that of the F-18s they're flying.
So bad.
Of the F-18s they're flying, it's not a case of having two. They had three between two planes. So there you go.
It was very confusing who was in what cockpit in parts of that.
No.
Anyway, we're not going to talk about Maverick now. I was not a fan. But anyway, getting back to electronic warfare, these Japanese systems are going to be fantastic if you're fighting people with no electromagnetic spectrum warfare capability, but it's incredibly vulnerable to jamming and interference. Now, I'm sure they'll tell us, oh no, we've made it completely jamming and interference proof, but the enemy gets the vote, and it's the trouble with electronic warfare in general is that you're invulnerable up until the second someone changes a frequency, and then all bets are off, or changes a frequency or a protocol. You've discovered a vulnerability. It's very fast moving. You don't know if it's working until a 120mm round shreds your tank, and you die, and you never even know that your electronic warfare package wasn't doing its job.
The Israelis have put a backdoor in your system and let everybody, and then sold it off to the highest bidder.
Yeah. I would also say, Mehdi, loving the comments you're sending in. We've got a M60 veteran with some thoughts for us.
Thank you.
Yeah, apparently the M1A1 did do skid shots that we were talking about with the...
mud flaps?
The leaning and shooting.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. Rob, do you have more to say?
Oh, it's so much more.
Oh, so much more.
All right, so
All right, keep us going.
Modular armour packages. So as we've discussed before, the base package of the Type 10 is a 40-ton tank, and then they have light armour packages that takes it up to 44 tons, and heavy armour packages that take it up to 48. Again, looking at
I just want to know what war you go to saying, I'll go the light armour package. No one's got any anti-tank weapons here.
Shush you. This way it allows it to...
I mean, tank crews literally, in every conflict they get into, just load, railway sleepers and bits of tank track and anything they can to...
Pour some concrete on the side of the tank. But there is a lot of speculation as to what sort of active and or passive protections the Type 10 has. We just don't know. It has, it discharge.
Very funky smoke discharges.
Yeah, so if it gets hit by lasers, the smoke discharges go off. But that's a lot of tanks do that these days. But we don't know.
I don't think people are going to warn the enemy with a laser designator going into the future.
Mm-hmm. I think they'll find something else.
But the video cameras, with the AI forming a picture of what it's looking at, can do such a job now that I think it's a 1980s, 1990s thing to be pointing a coherent light beam at the target and alerting the target to the fact that it's been designated. You don't really want to let them know.
No, but look, it does have, so it's got the various armor packages. We don't know what those armor packages are, what they do, what sort of...
the nanocrystals.
We haven't got to the nanocrystals. Okay. We will get to the nanocrystals. So we're just talking about the armor package. So it has a lot of panels on the sides of the turret and the sides of the tank.
They've all got little hatches in them, though.
Yeah,
so they're not heavy armor.
We don't know what sort of armor is underneath there. But, okay.
It might be providing some spaced armor value for
and it might have
high explosive anti-tank rounds. But,
and it might have ERA underneath it. We don't know. That's the thing. It's all very new and secretive, and they're not telling anybody at the moment. So, look,
but it's a lot. If it's just storage space, and tanks do need storage space for the cruise gear. If those sponsons on the turret
I'm
just
sure
stowage,
all the Japanese tank cruiser Marie Kondo's aficionados,
and they spark joy,
and they don't have a lot of stuff. All right, so I'm just going to assume that. But okay, now we'll get to the nanocrystalline steel, John. And what does that do? What is nanocrystalline steel? I hear you ask.
Okay, well,
we're not really sure.
Now this got very complicated for me because some of the sources have referred to it as monocrystal steel, which means the metal is one crystal. Now, this does exist and is reasonably well known in jet turbines, but there's a reason why only a handful of companies in the world can make jet turbines, because it's really hard to do and it's a closely held secret. It's also not generally in steel. John the metallurgist here. Generally speaking, big crystals make for bad steel and small crystals make for good steel. And so if it's a monocrystal, it's not actually that great, but monocrystal steel does give you some thermal properties, some really exotic thermal properties. That's why they use it in jet turbine blades. And when you're dealing in the weird world of tank penetrators and the exotic physics that occurs in those interactions, it was possible that you might want some weird thermal properties of a monocrystal. But I've had my brother who speaks Japanese go and look at the Japanese sources, and we're pretty sure it's nanocrystal, which means it's really, really, really small crystals, which goes back to the conventional thing that the smaller your crystals are in your steel, the stronger the steel and the better the temper and the less likely it is to fail.
Right.
Sorry, that's a long way to explain that, but just if you just randomly look up some sources, you'll see a reference to monocrystal, and that's just someone making a mistake.
Right. So what I found was that, yes, nanocrystalline steel is provided the high tensile strength, but shatters easily, so it's harder than normal armor steel, and lighter is a very important thing. It's much more expensive. It's part of the process of being very expensive.
Well, when you say lighter, steel is whatever weight it is.
Yeah, but for the strength,
it can provide the strength for
the
less
strength.
weight.
The strength for the weight is what it is, and this is where you really get into your Robotech and or BattleTech types of clan armor versus your inner sphere armor of how many tons of armor and then what do you get for it, and realistically for the tonnage of armor that is put on the Type 10 is much stronger than other tanks that are of the same weight. So, in comparison, the Type 90, which is a heavier tank, the Type 10 was able to not only have better armor put on it, but also has more weight of armor. It has an extra 2 tons of armor on the tank, just because they said, right, we're going to design this in order to have more armor that's better armor, even if it's more lightweight, but we're going to have more of it. And so they've managed to pack in a lot more armor onto the tank than the Type 90. It is brittle though when you're using your nanocrystalline steel. So, which is where you need to have your ceramics and other bits and pieces of top secret armor packed around it, whether or not it's facing the first shot or it's layered in between. It faces the first shot, the contact point, and then you have a ceramic, and then you have another layer of your nanocrystalline steel or what? We don't know.
Yeah, I mean, non-explosive reactive armor is still highly classified, but reasonably well understood, which is talking about, sheets of rubber and steel, and the idea is that as the penetrator rod of the the pin-stabilized discarding saber round comes in, it shears the penetrator because it flexes, and certainly a harder and more brittle steel in a composite package has some real possibilities.
But all this, when the Japanese designed it, they said, right, we still need to maintain a light weight, so it's not a all-round defence. They have gone for just the front 60-degree arc of the tank, so it's frontal arc.
Most tanks, anyway. Yeah.
Well, the Challenger would say it's protected all around, thanks, but it's gone for the frontal arc. It is designed to survive a 120mm round to the front arc, so a standard NATO round should not. The tank should survive a hit from the front by a 120mm NATO round. That was how it was designed. It's unconfirmed because one, they haven't actually had to do it, and two, they're not releasing the information if it doesn't. Now, how the NATO tanks would do against it, and on the other side of the situation, they've also their Type 10 APFS-DS round is designed to go through the frontal armour of any NATO tank. So, again, just in case.
So when we talk about it as a light tank, it's still got an enormous punch and a lot of defence. And to cram that into... It's probably really in any realistic combat environment a 48-ton tank, but is quite an achievement. And if the communications and intelligence, the C4I stuff is working, it's going to be absolutely terrifying to an opponent. You wouldn't want to be Ukrainian militias trying to defend against something like this.
So it is the armor. The rest of the armor package around the sides and the back and the rear and the top of the tank are designed to defeat RPG-7s. RPGs, but not anti-tank guided missiles, in which case that's what you want to have your infantry around to make sure that there's nobody sneaking around to your sides to shoot you from top with your top-down attacks or anything like that. It does meet all NATO tank requirements. Japan is not a member of NATO. We'll discuss that with Bo. But it does meet
neither is Australia, but we still work to their standards.
Yep.
The STANAG group. But the G in STANAG is a group. But anyway, yes.
So it does meet all NATO tank requirements. Okay. It is a tank. Now, this is a tank not designed to leave Japan. Right? Yeah, the Constitution says basically they're only there for protection.
For now.
We'll get onto that. For now. However, people have made comments about it doesn't have a lot of undercarriage armour. And so basically that makes it very vulnerable to IEDs.
No tank in the world is an MRAP.
Yes, but it's not. It's more basically they've made the choice to not do that. And it's not like...
Even Challenger, the only casualties it's had has been people getting their feet blown off when they go over mines. So,
that's like a 150-kilo mine.
Yeah. But
all right? It's not just a case of just a 4-kilo tank mine under the some dirt. It was a 150-kilo bloody piece of TNT blowing up underneath it. But what I'm saying here is that people made comment that the Japanese... they didn't do that. They chose not to give it Under Armour because they didn't think about IEDs. I believe they did think about IEDs, and they said, and the idea of, do we care about putting lots more armour on the underside of the tank when our tank is only designed to fight in Japan? how many IEDs are we likely to face in Japan?
They're not worried about an insurgency. That's
what I'm getting at. And that's what IEDs usually accounts for, is you're looking at large bits of explosives, not just a anti-tank mine, which they are designed to survive, but huge IEDs that blow out the bottom of a Challenger. And they're not going to get those in Japan. So they knew about them when they were designing this tank in 2003. So when the Challengers were going through Fallujah and everywhere else I don't know if they were going through Fallujah. They were going through other places within Iraq. And Basra, these things were happening. They knew about it when they were designing this tank. They've obviously made the choice not to do it because, to my mind, they're saying, we're not going to face those things in Japan. And I agree with them. That is a great way of saving weight on the tank. Because that is not a threat to you, just like...
But I would say, we know what design you need for a vehicle that goes over a mine, and it's a V-shaped hull and ends up with a very high vehicle, the Australian Bushmaster being a famous example, but also Taipans. Anyway, there's a bunch of them, and the V-shaped hull does work, but it's just not compatible with a tank.
No.
If you make a mine-protected tank, but it would be a really lousy tank in every other way.
Now... Speaking of a tank that's only going to fight in Japan, this is a tank that's not going to be deployed overseas, as we said, yet, or because of the Japanese constitution, and we'll discuss this. Do we want to get onto this sort of stuff now, or let the discussion happen with Bo first?
Yep.
And we'll come back to it.
Yep.
All right, so I think there's a lot of things. One thing we will say is that they did look at doing one of the constitutional limitations within Japan at the moment is they're not allowed to do arms sales to overseas countries. So they can do sales of weapons within, basically build their own self-defense force, but they're not allowed to sell those weapons
they did try to sell submarines, about 10 years ago.
We should have bought them.
Yeah, we should have. We'd have some submarines.
But with the Type 10, they did look at licensing the engine to the Turkish...
the Altay project.
Yeah, the Altay project. I guess the Turks were just basically looking around for anybody, whether it's Panther, Black Panther, K2s, the Type 10s, or anybody to provide them an engine that would suit their environment. And it very quickly in 2014 ran up against the Japanese constitution saying, yep, we're not allowed to sell military arms to overseas countries. And Turkey was also looking at wanting to license and export it themselves. So that all fell through. So Japan is the only operator. It has been allowed to be deployed to the US for training exercises. Now that's... that wasn't a given under their constitution. They made some constitutional changes to allow them to do that, and so they have gone over to the US to do training exercises with the Marines over there. Now, I think it's probably worthwhile we go into the interview with chat with Bo, and then we'll come back and talk about a few more bits and pieces with that, for outcomes from that, and then go from there.
No worries.
And what about, when do we get to see the tanker?
What tanker?
Your tanker.
My tanker?
Yes.
What do you mean?
Your poem.
Oh, yes. We'll do that when we come back.
When we come back. Lovely.
Yes. Okay. So g'day folks. Rob and I are joined by someone who, when I thought, who do I know who knows a lot about what's happening in Japan to try and explain Japanese life and politics, I thought, oh, I've got a brother who lives there. So we're joined by my brother. Now it says Samuel Griffiths in your name on the screen. Are we going with Samuel?
You can go with Sam. You can go with Bo.
Okay, all right.
I've always known him as Bo, so
let's go with Bo. It'll be easier.
All right.
His brain to compute.
Now, Bo, can you tell the audience a little bit about how long you've been in Japan and what you do there, and then launch into, if you can, what is happening with just the really big announcements in the last month on Japanese defense procurement?
Sure. Okay, so look, I've been living in Japan since 1999. I work I work in the recruitment sector. Nothing to do with defence recruitment, though. At this point, purely renewable energy related. But I've always been a bit of a history nerd, which, as you can tell, runs in the family. And so I keep an eye on sort of the Japanese politics and what's going on. In terms of what's been announced in the last, well, it's been a couple of months going. The biggest announcement has been that Kishida's, who's the prime minister, has basically announced that they're going to double their defense spending budget to bring it up close to 2% of GDP, which would bring Japan into line with what the NATO requirements are. Obviously that's an interesting announcement. Now, Japan is still constitutionally limited to being
less limited than they were, though.
Yeah, exactly. Those changes to the constitution that went through about 5 years ago did loosen things up a little bit, but fundamentally, I mean, Japan's still more or less. I think that was more really around the procurement that they got a little bit more flexibility to be able to, buy things like missiles, which are not really very defensive. I mean, there's not many defensive ways to use a missile that's not sort of air to air, right? But they're still not allowed to, build cruise missiles and that kind of stuff. So, yeah.
I bet they've got the plans for them ready to go whenever they do that.
Oh, I'm sure they do.
On that point, I mean, I remember about 10 years ago, an American friend of mine said something like, oh, well, of course, Japan can't build aircraft carriers. And I was like, no, Japan is definitely building aircraft carriers.
Well, yeah, I mean, they've got a whole series of those like flat top
helicopter destroyers.
Yeah, helicopter destroyers.
Just like Australia doesn't have an aircraft carrier either.
Yeah, and when you've got F-35s, then those are aircraft carriers pretty quickly, right? So it's always been a bit of a smokescreen. But the biggest thing is obviously they can't deploy their troops anywhere, which means in terms of training, the Japanese troops are not as well trained and integrated into other other potential allies, except for, of course, the Americans, who, Japan is still full of US military, right?
Essentially occupied, you could argue.
You could.
And
especially Okinawa.
Yeah, and they're also doing a lot of more naval training with the Australians as well, though. So they've got their land forces going across to the US to do training over on the West Coast there. So those changes to the Constitution have basically freed them up a lot from the legislative restraints that they had themselves under since the 1960s, when they first started making changes to the Constitution to allow them to do stuff and buy more stuff and selling. I like the article you sent through about how they're selling government bonds in order to buy more military equipment, but they won't sell government bonds to buy planes because planes fall out of the sky, but they will sell government bonds to buy ships because they last a lot longer.
Except when they get sunk.
Yeah. Especially when if Taiwan turns into a shooting war and China starts lighting the ships up. I mean, that's really the question, though, of Kishida-san's announced this increase in spending, right, to 2% of GDP. Great and fine. It's still unfinanced at this point, right? And so then one concept is they try and sell bonds to do that. The other one that has been floated a number of times is that they're going to introduce some kind of new tax. Now, as I don't think it's a secret to say that Japan has a debt problem. The government has a debt problem. They've got the highest, debt ratio of any, major industrialized nation, and a real revenue problem moving forwards when you've already got 25% of the population being over 65.
Yeah, and a decreasing population. I mean, they peaked in 2008, 2009. And it's going down from there. So, as you say, it's an aging population that's also decreasing. So, and with fairly strict immigration laws, because so they're not able to bring up more external workers in, I'm assuming.
Well, he's somewhere as an expert, but
yeah. Japanese immigration is a lot easier than you would think.
Is it? There you go. Okay.
They are weirdly. I mean, you have to have an employer in Japan. If you've got a university degree and a company that's willing to employ you, you've basically got a visa. Those visas you can get pretty much forever. It's not difficult to renew and to continue renewing. So actually that part's quite easy. The problem is getting someone to sponsor you and then finding somewhere decent to live, because whenever they try and address that, they always do it in some stupid way, right? Like they made it easier for farms to hire farm workers, but so they hired all these guys in from Cambodia and what have you. Great. They also said that they weren't allowed to bring their spouses or family with them as a condition of their visa. And you're like, wonderful. So you're going to create ghettos of Southeast Asian farmers all across the countryside of men only. Like, yeah, that's not going to cause any problems in the local areas. Bravo, government! You've thought that through.
Yeah. Look, getting back to the defense side of things, I'm really interested, because Japan, they call it the Maritime Self-Defense Force, but it's fundamentally the Japanese Navy, and it's flying the ensigns of the old RJN these days. It's huge. It's bigger than the British Navy. It's functionally...
There's a lot more sea for them to cover.
Yeah, but it's already a really big Navy. The Army is already a really big Army. We're going to talk in the rest of the podcast about how it's got more tanks than... again, equivalent peer countries. What is Japan seeing its need for this colossal defense expenditure at a time when, like you say, they've got a lot of demographic and budgetary problems?
Mate, they do have Russia right on their doorstep.
Well, yeah, Russia and China, to be fair.
I mean that the Russians have always said the islands to the north of Hokkaido there. They've got troops and tanks and forces stationed all up there saying these are ours, and that's not very far away.
I was about to say, to be fair, those islands, like, they're called disputed, but they are basically Russian. Russia has, possession is 9/10 of the law. Russia has them. Just Japan doesn't want to give up on them yet. But we've also got contested islands between Japan and Korea, and Japan and China as well. So
7,000 islands or something I read the other day.
Across the whole of Japan, yeah. So, yeah, I mean, look, it is. I agree. That's the one thing a lot of people miss, is the Japan Self-Defense Force is not small by any stretch. As a percentage of GDP, yes, they still haven't spent as much as, say, America has. But given the GDP of Japan, I mean, as much as you can talk about the demographic problems, it's still the number 3 economy in the world, right? So we're still talking about quite a significant amount of money going to it. So why increase the spending? I'm guessing at some point it is to do with trying to get a NATO membership, a NATO seat. I think,
is that just for the protection, or is that?
I would guess so. Yeah. I mean, which again is kind of silly, because with the number of US bases in Japan anyway, it's like, if Taiwan turns into a shooting war, Japan's going to get lit up just as badly as the United States or obviously Australia having Pine Gap and what have you as well. But Japan would go first.
Our B-52 bomber base.
Yeah, right. But Japan would probably be first, because the number of it's where the first missiles would probably be launched from, or certainly there'd be F-15s flying out Okinawa pretty quick.
Yeah, the pier at Yokosuka is definitely going to be on the target list.
Speaking of
Yokosuka. There you go. Yokosuka for sure. I mean, you got Fusa in the west of Tokyo. These army bases at Zama, probably not. Misawa is a massive US Air Force base. And then I don't even know the names of all of the ones down in Okinawa, but it's something like 1/10 of the whole landmass of Okinawa is taken by US bases. So, Japan's already tied so closely to the United States. I'm not sure why they want NATO membership, but I think they're under pressure there. What I think has been really interesting has been Japanese politicians turning up the rhetoric around Taiwan. and I've noticed that particularly in the last like 6 weeks to 2 months. And what I suspect is we are going to see them try and gear up for another constitutional change. The hardliners of the LDP are seeing, Taiwan as potentially being a trigger, which could convince Japanese people to agree to change the constitution to increase the
what's
the
the requirement for changing the constitution? Is it just the government doing it, or does it have to go to a referendum or anything like that?
I think to do this change, it would require a full referendum, right?
Is that a simple majority, though, or are there other conditions on that?
I think it is just a simple majority. I'm not 100% au fait on my Japanese constitutional law because that stuff's complicated and nobody writes about it in English. So, my Japanese stretches so far, and not that far would be the answer.
Now, I mean, in the last 50 years, the Japanese have been very similar to the Germans, and obviously for very good reasons, in terms of being quite proud of being post-war, saying we learned our lessons and we don't do this stuff anymore. And in particular, Japan with its constitution, the Japanese people I've known have been quite proud of the pacifist
Yes.
baked in aspects of the constitution.
Yes.
How are Japanese people responding to this push?
Yeah. So what I would question what you just said there is, I 100% agree. Japanese people have been very proud of their pacifist constitution, and I think generally are very keen to maintain that. If you look at the general population, obviously, typically also very not keen to discuss anything to do with World War II, or in fact, most people just have no knowledge of it whatsoever.
But that's been a deliberate construct of the society.
Yeah, absolutely, and that is a thing that, frankly, the LDP and the monsters who made it through the
like Shinzo Abe.
Well, Shinzo Abe's grandfather, Nobusuke Kishi,
my personal connection with that is my uncle was a prisoner of war over there, forced to work in one of Shinzo Abe's grandfather's coal mines as slave labor, and he fought for many years of his life. He passed away a couple of years now, but he fought for many years of his life to say, well, if we weren't slave labor, then can we get paid for being coal workers, please? And that never got taken up. So
4 years of coal miners' back pay would have been a good chunk of money.
Decent amount. I mean, that's a similar issue to what the Koreans have with. I think Japan's trying to get UNESCO World Heritage listing on Sado Island, which there's like a gold mine there. And in their colonial period, they took tons of indentured labor from Korea and made them dig gold there. And same kind of thing where they're going like, all right, so they were slaves. And Japan's going, no, they weren't slaves. Like, great, where's their pay? Let's pay them. Let's get that money, link it to inflation and pay it to their families.
Yeah, so, I hasten to add that Indigenous people in Western Australia are owed a colossal amount of back pay.
Well, most countries do have these kind of issues, but I think Japan's are particularly egregious through that period.
Yeah. But tell us more about how Japanese people.
Yeah, that early, LDP, they were trying to get people to forget what they had done, right? Kishi did not want people to know that he was, the Governor General of Manchuria or Manchukuo, as it was then. Obviously, and didn't want to highlight the fact that he had actually been sentenced to death as part of the war crimes tribunals in Tokyo, which they did effectively. The problem then is that people don't know about it, and people don't want to know about it, and they're very happy that Japan. All they know about it is that Japan does not want to be involved in another war. You'll find, typically in Japan, if you find somebody in Japan, a Japanese person who wants to talk about Second World War, they are almost certainly, every now and then you'll get some left-leaning communist who knows a bit about their history. Otherwise, they're a rabid, foaming at the mouth right-winger. And you're about to have a very frustrating and unpleasant, conversation with them. So but the rest of the population don't know, don't care, and definitely don't want to get involved with this. So this is where, when I see this increase in spending, my thought initially, to be honest, is like, what is, Kishida-san's game here? My suspicion is it's political, and he's being willing to run this line because he thinks it'll keep Abe-san's faction of the LDP supporting him. And I also think he's aware that, this idea of raising bonds, I mean, really, like, who's going to buy them? If not that, then they're going to have to raise taxes, and that is, that's going to be a loser at the polling booth, right? Japan's already quite a high taxing,
Society.
country. Yeah. Throw an extra one on because you want to increase the military. Like, I mean, I know which way. Well, I even as a permanent resident here, I don't get to vote, but if I did, I know which way I'd be voting.
Yeah, I mean, my thought on that was that obviously increased defence spending means increased cuts of contracts and kickbacks to people in positions of power.
But it's interesting.
Someone has to pay for it.
Yeah. And what's also, though, interesting and is worth noting, and certainly I think for some of what you guys are talking about with the Japanese tanks and what have you, is a number of the Japanese companies who have been involved in the defense business are pulling out recently.
Oh, yeah.
They're shutting down their defense business. And the reasoning is that apparently Japanese defense forces have a fixed 5% profit margin.
Okay. So you're not allowed to charge more than make a 30% profit.
Yeah, but you can hide your costs and reroute that. I mean,
I'm sure there's ways around it. But if you look at like McDonnell Douglas is advertising, like, not advertising, but, in their annual reports, they're talking about like 15, 18% profit margins on some of their constructions, right? And so, a lot of the Japanese companies just go, it's just not worth it for 5%. It's not worth doing this business. So you've seen that happening, and that obviously, like, one of the keys to America being able to spend as much money as they do is it's driving industry in the country, right?
I mean, everywhere. Yeah. Look, a question that you might have a good handle on is in Australia, we've got Australia wants to increase the military, but having huge dramas trying to get the people employed in it, and basically not enough people want to join up. What's the sort of labour market for the military in Japan like?
I think that has been an issue over the last few years as well. That Japan is really struggling with recruitment. They've increased their advertising a bit. You see them around a bit more. And the reading, I mean, I was getting on a lot on this, like, increase in spending is one of the key parts of it is they are not talking about increasing headcount of any of the defense forces. They're talking about more toys for the same number of people. And they're probably actually going to have an even harder time recruiting, because one of the other bits of news of the last month or so in Japan has been a quite serious sexual harassment case, as is often the case, is launched by one JSDF member of the Naval Self-Defense Force, and then a number of other members have come forward and confirmed or corroborated with their own stories, which puts an even worse recruitment pitch for the JSDF. So I think that would be a major issue for them.
And are they? Do they employ women in combat roles over there?
I don't know. I don't know if it's combat roles. I'm not, because I think in every country there's sort of weird levels to what's a combat role.
Where you can go. I guess one of the other things that the Japanese self-defense forces, because of their role and the limitations of the constitution, they can't be deployed. They're not deployed very often. So while the civil engineers, like civilian engineers, might get deployed all around the world to go out and carry out waterworks and roadworks and bridge works and all that sort of civil engineering, the actual military has limited deployment. So a lot of a lot of people join the military to go see the world type thing, and you probably don't get all of that with the Japanese self-defense force.
No. And I mean, I had a friend who was a ranger in the JSDF, and he was like, "Yeah, I quit because I got bored." Like,
Yep.
you know, it's like the most exciting month of the year was in March before the financial year close is end of
When all
March.
when all the money's got to be spent, and say, all right, we're going down to the range. We're going down that range, or we're going climbing Mount Yotai and skiing down the side of it with full packs and watching the Russians or something.
Oh no, they do that all the time anyway. Go skiing, but no, they'd just be like, "Oh, here, have these RPGs. We've got boxes of them," and be like, a bunch of rangers going, "We know what to do with these." Oomfa, oomfa, oomfa for days.
There you go.
Yeah, but it was like, it just got boring. Was never going to do anything, so quit. Went to uni, got a job.
Now, before we finish up, something that's I'm wondering about, and wonder if you can throw some light on.
Okay.
We talk about right-wingers in Japan, and obviously there's a confluence of convenience over the years between Japanese right-wingers and American interests in Japan, which doesn't have a political constituency of its own. At what point is there a parting of the ways likely with that, or are the Japanese right wingers looking at this as with a potential collapse of American power as being why they need to build up, or can you see any insight into what's motivating that?
Maybe collapse of Chinese power. Seeing what the chaos that might come out of that.
They just need to hold the Chinese off because their demographic collapse is starting too. But
yeah.
I
don't think. I don't think it's got anything to do with a perceived decline in US power. It should be noted that Trump and Abe were very, very close friends, and Trump had some very complimentary things to say about Abe-san, and what like effectively saying that he modeled some of what he did on what Abe-san did when he came to power in Japan. Because Abe-san, literally one of the big newspapers here is the Asahi Shimbun. It's always been quite left-leaning, and literally Abe-san cut it off at the knees. And it still exists as a newspaper, but its power has drastically weakened. There's some of the racial stuff that Abe-san did to Koreans in Japan. And it didn't really get reported, but it's been quite powerful and still has some implications, right? There was an arson attack in the Korean neighborhood in Osaka last year that's linked to that as well. So it's not just the Unification Church stuff that smears Abe-san. There's a bit more there, but I don't think it's because they see a perceived decline in the US. Yes, I mean, China's got demographic problems too, but I think they are being opportunistic about the threat of China at this point, and the fact that Xi Jinping seems to be more willing to kind of throw his weight around is making them go. Like I said, they're trying to lean on this issue of Taiwan, and Taiwan and Japan always have this very kind of oddly close relationship. Where like Taiwan is the only former colony of Japan where people seem to still like the Japanese, or will talk fondly of that period. The
enemy of my enemy. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, exactly. It's 100% related to that. So they, I think that's what's going on, and they're really just trying to lean on that. Look at big, scary China. Again, like the whole rest of the world, obviously, Russia is a concern, and they're trying to push off on that as well. To be honest, I mean, I live pretty centrally in Tokyo, and if you live anywhere near either the Chinese embassy or the Russian embassy, and right between the two is the Korean embassy, who obviously also, particularly with Abe-san in power, were quite vocal in their criticisms. You get to see the right wingers out there parading in their big buses with the loudspeakers and the old rising sun flags flying on a basically weekly basis. It's pretty much every Sunday. And well, I literally used to live right behind the Korean embassy. So, I mean, one Sunday morning, I was walking my dog and I saw this big van that was kind of designed weird. And I was like, oh, that's funny. And so I walked my dog up to it and was having a look inside because the police have barricades all around it to stop them, but it was too early. So the police hadn't seen these guys when they'd driven in overnight. But having a gaijin start looking in the window, they panicked and drove off. And it was as they were driving off, I'm like, oh, they were like the hardcore right wingers, and they probably thought I knew something about. I was just being curious as to this car parked on a very narrow road.
You were obviously Antifa, yeah.
Yeah, well, exactly.
You and your dog, yeah.
Yeah, I did. I mean, I also saw one of the few times where they actually, one of the little barricades got pulled out and a bunch of guys got stopped, and for some reason, a foreigner came in a car the opposite way, and I think he thought the barricade was stopping him, so he got out of his car and was like, hey, what's going on? And all the Japanese guys unloaded from this van and looked like they were going to try and kick off with this foreigner with the police in the middle. And I was like walking my dog, who was the most useless dog to have in a fight. He was a Yorkshire Terrier, towards it. And I was like, oh, what do I do here? Like, I can't just let this guy get a hiding from, 10 nationalists. But it's me and the useless dog here. Like, do I pick him up and use him as a missile?
There comes a point you let the dog off the lead and find him afterwards. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so those guys are around. But
thanks very much, Bo, from Totally Tanked.
Hopefully, it was some kind of useful information.
I think it's very useful information for all our audience, and we will talk soon.
All righty, no worries. Have a good one.
And hello, we're back.
We are.
In the live of the live stream. Hope you folks found that interesting and informative. I think there was some little known information about the reality of Japan.
It's so different than a lot of people think about is what Japan is and what it's like, and the protests that go on around the embassies and so forth. That's just crazy stuff for my thoughts.
Although we have our own Kuka movement here.
Yeah, I know, but
freedom protesters and QAnon. Japan might have invented these people though, so they've just exported it to us. Okay. Anyway, we did mention Japanese tank numbers in general. It's worth noting, aside from the Type 10, they have a large fleet of Type 90s. They also still have a fleet of the Type 74s. These are of varying capabilities and vintages, but certainly significantly more tanks than, say, the British.
And with the Type 16 wheeled tank destroyer as a backup to all these sort of things as new capabilities. And look, I would really like at the moment, John. Can we go to the tanker? Your tanker that you produce?
The tank R. Yes.
Now, this afternoon when I read about how Hitomaru is the name of the Type 10, and how Hitos means one, and Maru means 0, or a circle in Japanese, or the English translation of whatever it is, and so it means 10. And I thought, I wonder if there are any haikus about the Type 10. Mm-hmm. And as soon as I went looking for it online, I came out the types of Japanese poetry included a haiku and a tanka. And I thought, okay, there's got to be
a form of poetry called the tanker, then we've got to do a tanker about the tank.
And I put this challenge to John 2 hours ago, 4 hours ago now.
Yeah, but 2 hours before we started recording.
And within 5 minutes, he came up with this beautiful, beautiful tanker. And thank you, John. He is a man who can do poetry. I just want to show you the side of him that is magical.
Yeah, I do write haikus for fun and to annoy my boss, because my boss writes haikus for enjoyment, and I write It's haikus. Luckily, he will never watch this, so that's good. Okay, I'm just going to read it for the folks who are listening to us on the podcast. So, a tanka is like a haiku, but the first part is 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5 syllables, and then the second part is 7 on the syllables. So it's like a haiku with an extra 14 syllables to use. Type 10, a little tank with a Japanese steel gun. Air conditioning is lacking, and the armour very hard to understand. So there you go. There is a tanker about a tank.
By John.
By me.
Thank you, John. That was I saw that and I thought, wow, this guy's got skills. And yeah,
almost like I'm a digital communications professional.
Almost.
Sometimes on some days, it almost looks that way.
So after the discussion with Bo, we had a lot of talk about the Constitution, the expansion of the Japanese military, and the 5% profit margin for their military-industrial complex, and so why they're not making as much money as they would probably like. Hang on. I think I've gotten out of order because, first off, John, we should be talking about...
Yes. It's time for beer review.
All right. So, we have a Japanese beer brewed in Japan. Well...
Okinawa, which is part of Japan.
These days.
Mm. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Ask Mr. Miyagi. Mm-hmm. Yes. It is the Orion 75 beer, premium series, Pilsner.
Okinawa's craft. It's a craft Pilsner.
Is it craft Pilsner?
Reasonably rare beast. 5% alcohol per volume. 350 mils, which is stingy. Where's my 25 mils? Okay, so...
75 reflects the unique combination...
Beautiful can. Look at that colour gradient. Gradient on a can.
75 reflects the unique combination of the devotion of beverage quality and craftsmanship of Japanese beverage masters and the sun-ripened natural ingredients of the southern island of Okinawa. Orion's premium craft beer. There you go. So
I am willing to bet you it's Australian barley in here, not Okinawan sun-ripened barley.
It's 100% malt, buddy. There's no barley in this, is there?
Well, the malt comes from the barley.
All right.
Yes.
I don't do brew.
Also,
beer brewing.
look at the colour of this thing. That is not a Pilsner. It looks like an IPA. It looks like a West Coast IPA.
I guess that's how you transport it to Australia.
Yeah. Other than look, it's got a beautiful firm head. Let's have another little look there. So it's
made in Japan, manufactured by Orion Breweries, someplace Okinawa.
Yeah. Now, one way to tell if something's brewed in Japan. So our earlier Kirinichi barns that were brewed in Australia didn't have this. This one has some braille on the lid. Don't know if you can see it's there. Apparently, it just says beer. I had an evening with some friends around and some Okinawan beers, and there was a lot of Googling, and we figured that out.
There you go. It says beer.
Funny thing was, talking to Bo, I was like, Japanese beer cans have braille on them, and he's like, I do not know that. And it's like, I guess if it's just there all the time, you don't
many
really notice it.
Many years ago, going out to dinner in Japan with Bo, it was he taught me the way you get attention in a nice Japanese, in a Japanese bar or pub or restaurant is it's none of this sumimasen. It's a case of sumimasen and crying out for attention, and it's expected and accepted. And
you just cut your hand off on the edge of the screen.
I'm happy to do that.
Okay,
but it was a good night out. Yeah.
Just quickly on the comments, Albin Horman is amazed that we're still alive, and we're still live. Sorry,
right, yes, still alive.
Yeah, we've come back from the pre-recorded bit.
What do you mean? We're not even 50 yet.
Yeah. Apparently he's been listening to us since the summer in his first live stream. So good on you, Albin. Nice to talk to you. And Captain ACAB from Philadelphia has rejoined us. So that's fantastic, folks. Good to see you. Alan, of course, we still love you.
What? Anything else you want to say about the Orion 75?
Let's talk about the beer. Okay,
is it a Pilsner?
Yes.
All right.
It is absolutely a Pilsner. It is that really sharp Pilsner flavour, which is, in ye olde days when lager was just marketed more hops, this was what they were trying to deliver. Whereas if you really want more hops, you don't want to be drinking a lager. Lager's a relatively low hop beer.
1.4 standard drinks in the can.
I would say it's Okinawan lagers and pilsners are normally famous for being the best beer to drink on a hot summer's day because Okinawa's in a quite tropical area. And Japan has a thing where in summer it'll be summer beers, and a lot of them come from Okinawa. So it's despite the colour, it's a beautiful head. It is lacing wonderfully in the glass. It is a flawlessly created Pilsner with all of the correct flavours, as I would frankly expect from Japanese who pay attention to these sort of details.
Well,
how much did it cost?
So I bought 2 6-packs, one for the Kirin Ichiban and one for the Orion 75, and because they were going for like $25 a 6-pack, or if you bought 2, they went for $18 each. So that's what and that was just from the local not even first choice, buddy Coles Liquorland in Australia. So the Japanese beers are making a bit of an inroads into the environment to basically, yes, I do have a very nice thing for Japanese beers. I'm quite enjoying both the Kirin Ichiban and the Orion 75. It is a much stronger flavour for me than I'm used to with the Asahis and Sapporos that I'm used to drinking from Japan.
That's the difference between your Pilsners and your Lagers, in that the Pilsners do have a much stronger twang to them.
No, but I'm noticing that big difference. And I got to say, I would still prefer my the silver bullet of the Sapporo.
So if you sniff it, the malt backbone is actually quite strong. Like that colour is has been created by a stronger malt profile, which isn't always the case. You can get the colour without that, but they've got that in there. So there's a real earthiness on the nose. I don't know if I would call that a Pilsner, but I would call it very nice beer. So
there you go. Happy to drink it. But I think for me, if I'm going to choose Japanese beer, it's probably going to end up being Asahi or
Sapporo's always the best one.
Yeah, it is. Oh, so is. I love it. Anyway, back to tanks in the Type 10. So, changes to the Constitution. So, as we discussed with Bo, there were a number of changes to the Japanese Constitution that allowed them to carry out exercises with external countries, provide defence for their own troops, like active defence rather than just self-defence.
They have done some peacekeeping missions, and the constitutional limitations have been really difficult.
Because basically, if somebody else beside them is being shot at, they're not allowed to do anything about it, even though they're in the foxhole right beside them. That they have to be the ones being shot at before they're allowed to do anything. It's very legalistic. And
look, rules of engagement are always complicated, and multinational coalitions with different rules of engagement per country become fiendishly complex. And when you're in the foxhole and people are shooting, it's very likely that someone's just picking up a gun and having a go. But if they kill someone and that someone has family who matter, then they can end up in prison. So it's...
But to my mind, is because of this, or the hesitancy around the and the legalities around the Japanese Constitution and what they are and are not allowed to do, other countries can exploit those processes and that legalese to game the system in order to push Japan into a position where it probably doesn't want to be. And I think the constitutional changes they're making at the moment are going to allow them to basically push back against anybody saying, you're not allowed to do such and such, therefore I can go up to this line, take as much advantage as I like, and you're going to have to not do anything about it. And basically the changes they're making are allowing them to have a little bit more flexibility in the response they're providing.
Yeah, I just want to quickly run through some dot points of history that are very little known, partly because Japan's ignoring all of its history pre-1945, and partly because the rest of the world isn't very good with its history on this subject. So in World War I, Japan was a
Australian ally.
And a very good ally. We coordinated very closely with them for driving the German Asiatic fleet out of the Pacific Ocean. The Australia Squadron and the Japanese Navy did a lot of very clever work together to make that happen, and eventually the Coronels and the Falklands battles took place as a result of that. Japanese naval ships escorted the Australian troop ships to Europe in World War I, and the Japanese did everything that was asked of them in terms of conquering German territories in China. partly because they wanted those territories, but they were very good. Then you get to immediately post World War One. The Japanese wanted a anti-racial discrimination clause added to the Treaty of Versailles. And
guess what? Western countries didn't do that.
In particular, one Western country, Australia, basically gambled away our war debt of World War One to stop this anti-discrimination clause going into the treaty. It was brutal. It was horrible. It is a stain on Australia's character, and we definitely do not talk about it in this country. But so that upset the Japanese.
I've never heard of it. So
that upset the Japanese immensely. Then you got the 1921 Washington Naval Treaty, where some grown-ups in London suddenly realised that the Royal Navy was planning to fight a war with the Americans in 1928, and with the Japanese in alliance with the British and Australia getting involved in Canada. It was mental. It would have been awful. And grown-ups said, no, we're not going to do that. That shafted the Japanese pro-Western faction. Then Japanese history is very complicated with a series of assassinations and coups.
Very messy.
Leading up to World War II. But that is context that you won't normally get in terms of we did quite horrific and regrettable things to Japan.
Policy-wise, not physically.
Policy-wise, but when their countries were, prior to 1921, spending a third of its national budget on their navy to participate in this war, we said we were going to launch against the Americans. They got shafted there, and then since the war, Australia literally stopped Japan from starving by being willing to sell them grain in 1946, and we still get a concessionally enormously inflated price on grain to guarantee supply.
And they put up with our tourists going to Niseko and sort of skiing on their mountain.
Our tourists aren't the worst, but yeah.
Have you met our tourists?
Yeah, they're not the worst. They're not great, but yeah. Anyway, so that's just some important context that you won't normally hear about, certainly Japanese-Australian relations. And there is still an enormous amount of resentment over the way Japanese treated Australian prisoners of war, and entirely deserved. Having said that, if you look at the way...
One of my other extended family members was beheaded by the Japanese in World War II. So, again, not just my uncle. It was a number of... I'm the youngest of our the cousin within the generation, so I have a lot of older uncles and so forth, and they were involved in that. And, so it was pretty messy for a lot of them.
I would also say that the Australian treatment of Japanese prisoners of war was not stellar either, and I say that my grandfather on my father's side... after his foot got injured, ended up doing prison guarding, and he would tell us stories with great pride that sounds like a war crime. And then the Kara breakout and things like that. So it's more complicated than most people realise. There must be some people in Japan who are aware of their history because they're guiding the policy of the country, but they do largely black all of that out. Alan has asked on beer, does the colour of beer dictate the flavour or the other way around? In terms of the malt, which is the grain that is used, the darker the beer, that generally comes from the characteristics of the barley and the way it's been heat treated to sort out the sugar profile. Generally speaking, and there are huge exceptions, the darker it is, the stronger that malty flavour will be. Having said that, you can make white stouts that look like a lager but taste just like a pint of Guinness. So, it depends.
Well, as with anything, there are depths and layers. Okay,
Tasman's joined us. Awesome.
Hey, thank you. Thank you for joining us. Look, a few more points about the Type 10. Not a lot of details online about the Type 10 because it is a brand new tank. It has not been picked over by any other country because it's only been used by the Japanese. It has been introduced as in War Thunder as a playable tank, so as a Type Tier 10 playable tank. And
most
again,
of YouTube information is based on the War Thunder, which, as we know, War Thunder has a lot of classified information.
the War Thunder what was it? Error report, bug report people have made a very specific point with the Type 10 saying, do not post any classified information that will get us in trouble about this tank because it is very secret. And so just if you've got photos of it, just tell us that what we've got wrong in our depictions of the actual tank. Don't try and give us any internal information. I thought that was very nice.
There was another War Thunder leak just this week. Someone posting classified information. This time was about the F-16, but we're up to four times people wanting to prove themselves right in arguments in the War Thunder forums have leaked classified information to make their point. I am right. You losers are wrong. I'm going to prison, but I'm right.
All right. So the JSDF is looking to expand and become a deployable force. So this is, as we're discussing with Bo, they're looking to increase their spending on defence. They're looking to increase their size. Who knows how many tanks they will, Type 10 tanks they will end up building. As we said, they've got 106 at the moment. What number that will get up to in the next coming years? One number I saw floating around the interwebs was 600, so who knows? And look, we made the point before of how many tanks Japan has. A lot of tanks. When they'll announce development this is a point I thought about when looking at it. So after discussing with Bo how the Japanese Self-Defense Force is looking to expand, the Type 10 was built for deployment within Japan. So that says to me, what tank are they looking to now develop in order to be a overseas deployable tank? Because this is a really good tank for Japan. Just like the Merkava is a very good tank for Israel. What tank, if they're going to change the constitution in order to be able to deploy forces overseas, what tank are they going to build for that? Because that is not this tank. The Type 10 is not designed to be shipped overseas.
I think this is still a useful tank in the Asia Pacific region. This will be a very useful tank in the defense of Taiwan
and Korea.
Yeah. Well, I don't think that Japan is going to be sending forces into Korea voluntarily on the part of the Koreans anytime soon. It's the enormous complicating factor of North Asian politics is that the Koreans are so pissed off with the Japanese, and the Koreans have every historical right to be. Having said that, like I said, it all depends where you start the story. Everyone's got a point of view, but it would suit the Western alliances and ideas of quadrilaterals and containment of China if we could get the Japanese and the Koreans to get along, but that's asking a lot, and it's probably not going to happen.
No, but it is a suitable country for the Type 10. So, yes, I mean, they'll be going through with these constitutional changes on the horizon and being pushed by the government. There will be somebody sending an email right this moment saying, okay, these tanks can't go overseas. Start thinking about the next one. And that conversation, I bet you, is happening right now. So, and we'll see what comes out of that in the next couple of years. Mm-hmm. Now, John,
are we done with the Type 10?
I think I am done with the Type 10. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Oh no, I just want to point out. Did I mention about the? No, I did. That's right. We've done Tanker. We've done John's beautiful poetry. Mm-hmm. That was all for me from the Type 10.
Okay, we will move on to part 2,
which includes. Now, for those who want to know, yes, for Christmas, I did buy myself the Panzer P38T model kit. So
this is the Tamiya model kit?
Yes.
And the point we're showing this to you is that we are going to start doing a build-along with you folks. So what you need to do is get yourself the Tamiya PZ38T, and then we're all going to start making it and sharing our making journey. And Rob surprised me with this, but our mate Clayton, who is a very important person in the modelling community, is going to give us a list of...
a good friend of our tank podcast.
Although he did say he was going to buy us a beer tube, and I see no beer tube. Clayton?
We don't need a beer tube. Anyway, right, my ride home on my bike is precarious enough without a beer tube.
I'm buying a beer tube next month if it doesn't turn up, Clayton. Anyway, the point is he is going to give us a list of items you need to buy to make the kit. And we're going to talk about that in the next episode. Once I've finally moved house and can have a half-built model tank in my life, because it's just something I can't deal with right now.
I'm not going to be able to transport mine back and forth. I brought this one today.
Yes.
On the bike.
Now the pictures will do.
Exactly. I was
the terrible pictures of your Nokia phone. Yep.
I was 50-50 whether I even put it in the pannier bag to bring along, but I thought, look, it'll be all right. Beer will be fine. It'll be fine. So,
okay. On that note, things we have to talk about now. Quickly, patrons. Persicora, Carter Heller, Scotch 12, Brian Jenkins, Vikram Murthy, David Mulvaney, and in our top tier, Stamps. So, thank you, folks. Do appreciate you enormously. Okay, first thing on the list is the greyhound that never killed a tiger.
Now, that story came out and we all went, "Aww." We liked the idea of the greyhound with its 37 mil gun sneaking up behind the back of a tiger, going blap 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 into the rear of it and blowing it up during the Battle of the Bulge.
I have heard that story at 2 tank museums put out over the PA by some of the most respected historians in the world, and Tank Encyclopedia have done a very good job of going through the actual reports on both the American and the German sides and make an absolutely compelling case that the greyhound did not kill the tiger.
But I wanted to, because that is the real underdog tale. It's the literal greyhound killing a tiger. You actually put a real greyhound versus a real tiger. Mm-hmm. You know who's going to fucking win that one.
Mind your language.
Mind my language. So who said that?
Okay, it's an interesting case, and in my brief time at the Australian War Memorial, I encountered this a lot, where people would just be like, "This is in our unit diary, so this is the truth," and it's very frustrating because literally the enemy's war diaries are available, so you can at least get a sense of what they thought was happening. I'm not saying you necessarily want to trust them any more than you trust your own, but there are lots of times where it's like, what did the enemy think they were doing and what did they have around? And particularly the evidence on this is that the Germans, there weren't that many Tigers and Tiger 2s. They had very good records of where they were and what they were doing.
I'm surprised at how many Tiger 2s were in the Battle of the Bulge versus the Tigers. The numbers were huge.
Yeah, well, it was the newer tank at that point, and the Battle of the Bulge was their big effort. And they got their chance, and as we've said before, very good battle, almost won.
We'll get to that book.
Yes,
John will get to that book in his other podcast.
The next one.
Is it? Cool. Looking forward to it.
Okay. That's the Culture Books podcast for people who want to read some Ian M. Banks books and listen to us talking about the chapters one by one.
John Sheridan, not me.
Yeah,
I'm just a fanatical listener.
Rob listens to that one. Yeah. Okay, back to the Tiger and the Greyhound. So what it actually turns out most likely is it might have been, and I love this so much, a Panzer IV, because...
What a surprise!
Because every single Tiger that was engaged by Western forces in Europe was almost certainly a Panzer IV and not a Tiger. They just thought that... the Panzer IV and the Tiger are very similar to look at. And the other one is...
The scale is slightly different. But
the scale is different.
At night, in a forest.
If you don't know the range exactly and have some sort of computer processing the parallax difference...
You don't have your fire control picture telling you that is this sort of tank and its vulnerabilities are here.
Yeah.
Unlike the Japanese and the Type 10.
Yeah. Or it might have been a Stug 3, which again, a Stug 3 at a distance in bad light, the blockiness of it, you could easily think it was a Tiger. So that is probably what the Greyhound destroyed, and particularly if it was a Stug 3, that would explain why they couldn't get their turret around to engage them, because they ain't got no turret.
No. Traversing, yes.
But it is interesting that so many authoritative sources have told the story as if it's true, because someone said it was true. And again, if you go back and trace the sources, initially it was a Tiger and then it became a Tiger 2. But there was no, even nearby American units didn't corroborate it in their unit diaries. And it might have been a Tiger 4, might have been a Stug 3. It definitely wasn't. But, I mean, it was, still good work by the Greyhound to destroy this enemy vehicle with its little tiny 37mm gun. But, yeah,
which is a perfectly respectable gun for the beginning of the war, which would which would go through most rear armoured.
By 1944, not
45.
Sorry, 45.
Oh, sorry, it was December 44. Yeah. Yes, you're right. Sorry.
Anyway, so that was really that was news to me. I was literally writing an answer on Quora, and I thought, I'll just find a source for this. And so Tanks Encyclopedia article came up and I was posting it. And then I actually read it. I was like, this completely just proves my point. That's very annoying. And all these museums that have told me this story were just lying. Obviously, I'm not saying they were deliberately lying, but they were just spreading a story that's a great story, but probably isn't true.
Not David Fletcher. Who's the other tank historian for the Tank Museum?
There's a few. Wiley, I've heard tell the story. But
No. I'm thinking there's David Fletcher is retired as well from the Tank Museum.
Yes, he's had enough.
Yeah, so
he never liked our input. Not our input in particular, the public's input.
I did love those comments. He had some great commentary about it was a.
And if you've got some ideas about this tank, I don't want to hear it.
Well, these British tanks should just break down for the fun of it.
Yeah. Yes. Okay.
Wagner Group or something else?
Now, let's talk about the failure of the Pumas.
Go for it.
So, quite big news while we've been away. 18, I think, German Pumas all had casualties on exercises, mostly with their autoloaders failing. I actually have a theory that because the Puma is a joint Rheinmetall KMW project, I have strong suspicions that Rheinmetall are trying to burn KMW to the ground at the moment. I would not want to be in a joint project with them. Because Rheinmetall wants its Panther to get up and doesn't want the KMW tank with a Rheinmetall gun to go forward. Anyway,
KMW is the
they're the guys who make the Leopard and they're in the joint project with France.
I was about to say they are French related then.
Well, they're in the joint project with France that Rheinmetall's trying to end run with the Panther. With the Panther. I suspect skullduggery. It seems really weird that a vehicle that had previously been accepted into service would suddenly have mass casualties. And when weird things happen, I get suspicious, but maybe it's a dud. Yeah. Okay, that's the Pumas. That's one to watch for. Now, we've got the Wagner Group. It's their unofficial logo we've got up because it's much more dramatic.
That's what your skull looks like after they hit you in the head with the sledgehammer.
Now, yes, because that's how Wagner Group inflicts discipline with sledgehammers to the heads of their troops.
Yep.
Now, the interesting thing with Wagner Group is in Ukraine, essentially the Russian army has failed. And Wagner Group which is very much Putin aligned, is stepping in. And you might, if you were suspicious-minded, think that Putin knew that the Russian army was going to fail and that he could start building...
And he set them up to fail.
Yeah, and that he could start building his own private army through the Wagner Group to get real successes. So, where are they doing the fighting at the moment?
Not Melitopol, Bakhmut.
Yeah, Bakhmut. And Wagner Group managed to capture a small town near Soledar.
And Sil, which is the...
Yeah. And this has been big news. The Russians are like, yeah, we've captured something. And it's like,
interesting though.
Aren't you special boys?
Yeah, the Wagner Group went in and did most of the work around Soledar, but at the last moment, the Russian army, regular army, stepped in and took the laurels, as it were, of actually capturing.
There's a lot of internal Russian politics going there. I would say, a woman in my office at work asked me, what is this Wagner Group thing? And I hadn't actually thought about how horrific they are until I started trying to explain it to her. Because basically, Wagner Group goes to Russian prisons and says,
Or Central African prisons.
Yeah, but let's talk in the Russian context about this. Russian prisons says, give us your strong, fit men. And then they say to them, hey, you get to get out of prison, but you're basically the dirty dozen now and you have to go fight in Ukraine.
It's going to be some great movies in about 5 years' time. Isn't it?
They're basically cannon fodder in Ukraine. But the horrific thing is, when you're part of the prison industrial complex, do you think you can actually say to them, "Oh no, I'd rather stay in my nice warm prison cell and get my 3 meals a day"? Because it won't
warmish.
It won't stay warm, and you won't get your 3 meals if you say no, because the prison, the guys running the prison, are being paid by how many prisoners they deliver to Wagner Group. And there was a guy just recently defected to Norway, managed to get away, but he had been a Wagner commander, not just a grunt.
Yeah,
and he was
somehow got up to the northern border and scampered across the border and through the snow, and found a house on the Norwegian side of the territory, and knocked on the door and said, "Please save me! I'm going to get killed by the Wagner Group," and basically been taken in by Norwegian police, and is now asking for political asylum from the Wagner Group.
Yeah, well, from Russia. But the point is that he was saying, you think you're in for a 6-month contract, and they just say, no.
You're being renewed, re-upped.
Your contract's been extended.
Yeah.
But just the sheer horror of, armies have always recruited from prisons, and in particular, the whole idea of a judge saying you can either do 6 months in prison or you can join the army, and young foolish dude says, okay, well, the army sounds better than that. So this isn't uniquely Russian, but the way they're doing it is uniquely Russian and appallingly awful, because these poor buggers in prison, won't get fed, won't be able to stay warm if they don't just agree to go and become cannon fodder in Ukraine.
Yeah.
And their recruiting methods in Africa, I imagine, are even worse, because, frankly, if you're a bunch of Russians, do you care that much for the well-being of your African recruits?
No.
I don't think you do.
Yeah, they're a mercenary group, not a military group.
Yeah.
So.
But they've gone from, a few years ago, 2,000 members, and they fought quite a lot in Syria. At the moment, they're up to 50,000, and it
That's just in what's deployed around Russia and Ukraine. That's not including Syria, Central African Republic, Uganda, and... there's another one they're involved with in Africa. So yes, they're around, as it were.
Yep.
Little green men, as they call them.
Now, quickly, just talking about Elon Musk decided to talk about tanks.
Yeah, I didn't want to,
Yeah,
but John said.
Yes. So Elon thinks that tanks are a death trap now and have lost all relevance. And Elon said a lot of really stupid things.
I think Elon is a death trap and has lost all relevance. But I don't own Twitter, or even am on Twitter, so therefore my opinion doesn't count as much, I guess.
Yeah, the point is that he's basically taken on an enormous amount of Saudi debt and then ruined Twitter with it. Because, I do use Twitter, and Elon Musk thinks this guy with an account, it's literally called CatTurd2, thinks CatTurd2 is hilarious because he keeps telling Elon what a genius he is. And I've got CatTurd2 in my feed all the time. I don't follow this dude. But Elon thinks he's great, so I have to see his stupid tweets.
Just because he's made that as a prerequisite, if you're on Twitter, you have to get this in?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, so...
That's a new algorithm. Imposed by Elon rather than...
He's taken a lot of Saudi money, but his views on tanks, I think, are worth... quickly debunking, because literally the number one news item about Ukraine in the last month has been who is sending them tanks, where are they getting tanks from. The number one thing that the Ukrainian government is asking for is tanks. This does not sound, admittedly we're biased, we do a tank podcast, it does not sound like tanks are irrelevant.
No.
It does not sound like tanks are past their use-by date. What it sounds like is Elon's stupid mate who he was responding to is like, I saw a video of a drone dropping a hand grenade through a hedge, so obviously tanks are irrelevant because we can disrupt them with new technology. I mean, for God's sake.
Realistically, I'm guessing the Ukrainian government is asking for air superiority, because if you've got air superiority, you can do pretty much whatever you like in your own space. Whereas having tanks on the ground is nice. But if you control the ground already, which they pretty much do, you really, 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 really want air superiority and be able to impose your will upon the airspace over your enemy's area. So they probably are asking for more F-16s and anything else, any other fighter bombers that they can get, but other countries are not. Sorry, I shouldn't say Western countries. Other countries aren't giving them to them. Whereas that might be an escalation too far for whoever's involved. But whereas they are willing to give tanks now. Sorry, I shouldn't say they are willing to give tanks. They are looking at giving tanks. Now, the Challenger 2s, the Brits are giving 12.
Now, we did talk in the last episode about this, but I am 99% sure that the reason why the British announced in the last couple of weeks, that they're sending these 12 Challenger 2s to Ukraine is because the Ukrainians have completed their training. So it's the crews have to be ready to go before anyone wants to do this. And 12 Challenger 2s. The Ukrainians have
That's a company of Challenger 2s, and that's a force multiplier.
Yeah, well,
in one spot.
It is a significant force. You get them all together and you go at the enemy, and Challenger 2 is a very well-protected tank. They haven't seen anything like it on the battlefields of Ukraine. It's going to take some killing by the Russians.
This week's question is whether or not Germany releases the Leopard 2s.
Free the Leopards! Hashtag free the Leopards.
Leopard 2s that they have in storage and have been refurbishing madly for Ukraine, or whether or not the US will release some of their backlog of backstock of M1A2s Abrams.
Now, I've heard a theory that I like.
And I like your theory. Tell us the theory.
Okay, and it's just a theory. This is complete headcanon. It's complete hypothesis. This is not based on any provable facts. So I just want to get that out of the way.
Just making stuff up and putting it on the internet, man. Does that make us the President of the United States? Could be.
The theory is that the reason why the Germans are insisting that they will not send Leopards to Ukraine unless the Americans also send M1A1s. That is... anyway, Abrams. That's true. That's known data, okay? The theory behind why they're saying that is that what the Germans do not want, because they are planning the next round of tank export sales, is for just to have pictures of destroyed Leopard 2s on the nightly news. What under this theory, they're saying we want our competitors for tank exports.
Competitors is the important word here.
In the field at the same time, so that both our tanks are getting destroyed, because the nature of tanks is to be destroyed. And I find this theory has a lot to recommend it, but it remains just a theory. Yeah.
Quite willing to provide a lot of artillery and or back area services and hardware, but the things that actually have to go up to the pointy end, they don't want to provide things that are going to hurt their sales of tanks. IFVs are disposables, I guess, or mobility vehicles are disposable.
It's more just that the public know what a tank is. They don't really know what an IFV is. A picture of a burned out BMP doesn't have the same impact as a T90 BM.
No. And that's where we get to the idea that they want to. If everybody's jumping into the pool, everybody jumps into the pool. You don't get to the Abrams doesn't get to sit out and say, "Oh, I'm the best tank around," because I'm not the one getting blown up by T72s or T90s.
Yeah, I do want to emphasise though that while it might seem like a small force, 12 or 14 Challenger 2s deployed correctly will have a decisive impact on this battlefield. When the Kharkiv breakouts were happening, I think it was described as an armoured fist of 8 T-80s. Because both sides are so depleted and worn down that it really could go either way. It's also worth noting there's a lot of chatter at the moment about the Russians launching another invasion through Belarus.
Yep. End of February, as per tradition says. I mean, the Winter Olympics aren't even on, and they might come in through there again.
Yeah. It might happen.
The way they're building up the forces, it'll happen, and they'll probably all get slaughtered.
Well, this is the problem though, is that the Russians they used all their best gear last year. Now they're just pulling increasingly decrepit wrecks out of pits and
T62s on the road.
Yeah, and I get old bicycles going all the time. Sometimes you pump up the tires and lube the chain and it's ready to ride, but a lot of the time when it's been in the pit, it's got some problems.
Well, on that happy note, I think we are done for today, don't we? We done. Mm-hmm. All right, thank you all very much.
Hey, I would say check it out. This is the new Totally Tanked. Go that way. There we go. Feel the fabric, Rob.
Ooh.
It's silky. Yeah. Rob's obviously wearing the tiger.
I haven't updated my wardrobe yet. That is, it was one of my big considerations this afternoon when I was jumping on the bike to ride over here. Was what shirt should I wear? And I've only got a limited number, whereas I think I have to expand my wardrobe for the podcast, John. That'll come. We'll see.
Very true. Okay, so folks, there's a bunch of you still watching. Thank you so much for sticking with us. And, we will be back after I've moved house. Oh, God.
And sometime in February, probably late February, the way things are going.
Yep. But you know what the great thing about doing a modern tank is, Rob?
Yeah, we can go do an old tank.
We can do a World War II tank next.
Oh, there we go. Who knows what that could be, and what beer's going to go with it.
If you want to have a say in what tank we do, you better subscribe on patreon.com.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much.
Or if just Cornelius asks us, we'll do whatever tank he wants.
Probably.
But in general, get on Patreon, give us some money, and we'll do more things for you. Okay. Thank you, folks.